With all this change, it actually feels like the role of the senior tax executive is changing as well. And it's requiring a different set of skills in terms of influencing and communicating, sometimes external communication in respect to tax matters. How are you dealing with that change in terms of your personal role and skill set required to do the job?
That's an interesting question, Joe, and I've been giving it a lot of thought over the last 2 or 3 years in my role. Because when I think back to when I started at senior levels in tax, again, it was your technical skills were what you needed to be a success in that role. Now, that's a very small part of the role. You have to learn to ways to communicate, and what I refer to as communicate in English, not in tax. You have to be aware of different agendas, and you have to manage different agendas internally. So the board may have a different agenda from other management in the organisation. Individuals in the board have different perceptions of tax, and you have to manage those agendas. So it's a whole pile of different skills that we never needed to worry about before. So I now spend a lot of time working with senior management. I meet our chairman every quarter to talk to him about what we're doing and what he's seeing in the external marketplace around tax planning, around the tax agenda, around tax policy. I talk to our audit committee on a regular basis, much more frequently than I've ever done in the past. But being aware also that Pearson could be in the public eye at any moment, and we could get press coverage. How do I think about managing that if I need to? Fortunately, recently we've not had to deal with that, but that's something that we're continually aware of, and being also aware of how some of the things that we do not just play out in the press arena, but play out in public opinion, and how conscious is the public of sort of the tax planning that companies do. I personally have the view that we need to be conscious and very aware of that, but that actually it doesn't really impact public opinion that much at sort of the day-to-day level, but it's something that people should be concerned about and be aware of.
Jim, your career has been a bit unique in that you've been the global senior tax executive for several big multinational companies, but you were also the senior tax executive for a U.S. subsidiary. So turning now to inbound companies into the U.S., talking about this global policy environment, why do you think it's important for those senior tax executives to be focused on the global environment when thinking about the U.S. business of an inbound?
I think the U.S. is just incredibly important as the global tax policy becomes more clear, as the OECD work begins to take shape over the next 12 months. The US is the biggest economy in the world. For our business in Pearson, the US is our biggest market. How the US reacts both to the OECD work on BEPS, but also how the US reacts in terms of its own tax code, whether there is real tax reform in the US, whether it affects inbound companies or domestic companies or both, is going to be enormously influential. And when I look at the challenges that we might face and that I personally might face as a senior tax executive for a major multinational, it's around understanding how the US will react to BEPS changes coming out of the OECD, and will the US implement some of those changes, or view, as some suggest that they do, view some of the proposals coming out of the OECD as a sort of an attack on the US tax system. So how will the US react to that? Secondly, which may be related or may be a separate sort of a separate agenda, is how the US corporate tax regime will develop and change and possibly reform. We can speculate that something may happen soon, or we can be very skeptical that something in terms of corporate tax reform might not happen for years and years. But it will happen because it needs to happen. The US tax regime is now so different from most of the other G7 tax regimes that it's beginning to become a block to, I believe, US competitiveness, a block to how companies work and trade with the US, and actually has impacts on the US economy and US jobs, etc., etc. So something needs to change. How that will change in what is, how that change happens rather, in the arguably the most complex tax regime in the world is going to be a major area of focus for me and my peers as a sort of head of multinational companies operating in the US. I like to think that one of the, you described it as one of my experiences managing and leading a tax department, a US tax department of a major multinational, and living here for 3 years has given me an insight I think that others would also benefit from, because you actually understand how the US tax regime works, particularly the administration and the policy of US tax, which is very different from certainly the UK. So it's something that I'm personally trying to stay very close to, because how it's going to pan out in the next, well, who knows how long, but it could be very, very interesting as the impact that it has on the global tax regime.